Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this special presentation of TVBAKWETU. It's Friday, the 1st of July. Happy new month. Hope you're having a wonderful time. And it is exactly 21:13 Central African time. I'm your host, Linda Banks, and I'm going to be joined by my co-host, Aka, who's literally just getting ready. And we're going to be joined by a special guest. Now, before we go any further, if you could kindly let me know where you're watching us from and just say a quick hello. Let's just have a look at who has joined us. We have Lisa Namwaka. Where are you joining us? Good evening. Well, I don't think we want to be getting into that. Honorable, no, hardly. Happy Nsenga, good evening. Happy says Daniel. We've got Elias, we've got Chichi, Mr. Z Africa, Can you just let us know where you're watching us from and our YouTube family? I'm very impressed, guys. You're so early. KO watching from YouTube. We've got Echo joining us. Festwell. Ooh, Festwell, where are you from? That name sounds familiar. I hear Chipata has got some exciting news. Can someone just enlighten us on what has been happening in Chipata? Someone says Walinda, watching from Mazabuka, watching from the United Kingdom. Australia's in the house. Canada's in the house, New Zealand, Australia and New Zealand. Hopefully, you're going to all gather and welcome our former CEO, actually, Mr. or Doctor or His Excellency. Gosh, he is going to be like the Nigerian evangelist, Doctor, Honorable, His Excellency, Ambassador Elias Mucho. We can't decide what to call him yet. So all of you guys who are watching from Australia and New Zealand, please make our dog very welcome when he comes there. Go there and cook some mishima, have a party or something. So we have Chipata, but okay. Chipata, what is this that I've been watching? You guys terribly excited that you have a new Hungry Lion. This is so funny. We're going to get into that in a little while. We've got Alex. Alex, where are you catching us from? Monze. That is fantastic. So we've got Lusaka, we've got Monze, New Zealand, Swaziland, South Africa, Lisa, Lisa, where are you from? Teddy, Kingsley Fraser from Namwala, from Solwezi, from what is this place? Oh goodness, from Chiwombo. Chiwombo Mlishanmkwe. That is wonderful. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. Now, we have some interesting things happening in our country, and we really just want to dissect that in a little while. And I've got a couple of people who are going to help me discuss that. Now, I think the gist of what we're going to be talking about can be summed up in a post that I saw, and it goes, if you blow less air into a balloon than you did before, does it shrink or does it grow slower? So this is going to be inflation versus deflation 101. And this is going to be an interesting topic. So please call your friends, call your neighbor, call everybody, tag a friend and let them know that TVBAKWETU is live. Some of the topics that we're going to be looking at are what is the relationship between inflation and prices, because a lot of people are getting themselves in a bit of a pickle. What policies do the UPND have in implementing or to ensure that they bring the prices down? Another topic that we'll be diving deeper into will be when they actually start feeling the relief from all these hiked prices of various things, various commodities even. To join me right now, before Aka comes on, I've got a man who is a Rhodes graduate in financial economics and Zambian capital markets practitioner, and he's been practicing for over 11 years. He's been working with institutions such as the Lusaka Stock Exchange, various pension funds, securities and exchange, and many other business advisory and financial markets. This man, he's licensed to practice as an advisor for securities, specializing in local financial markets, and also works with individual families as a business advisor. He also works with startups and growth. He's a growth strategist. So he's a man who's versed with economies, and he's versed with all things inflation and deflation. And his name is Mr. Munyumba. Now, I've been practicing to say his name. I hope I haven't murdered his name. Munyumba Mutwale. Good evening and welcome to the program.
Good evening, Linda. You actually got it. You actually got it brilliant. I'm the one who actually ended up butchering your first name on this one after saying it correctly so many times.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, especially being at the last minute. So we're so grateful that you could grace us with your presence.
Not a problem. I am more than glad to try and clear the air, help guide people, and to help people maybe take their next steps on trying to navigate through our economic conundrums at the moment.
Fantastic. Now, let's start from the beginning. What is the relationship between inflation and prices? Because obviously, a lot of people are, especially the opposition, they had a field there last night, and I was looking, thinking, oh gosh, this is quite hilarious. So, could you just explain to our viewers the difference between those two, the
Well,
relationship
I
between
think
inflation and prices?
I think the first thing I can actually put down when it comes to inflation and prices,
Hmm.
prices are obviously what you pay for things, the price of things, the cost of things. Inflation is the rate at which those prices move up. So I always
Hmm.
tell people the simple thing is this: think of inflation and what we're tracking as the speedometer on a car. All right. So it consider our country was moving at about 24 kilometers an hour and has slowed down now to about 9 kilometers an hour. So
Hmm.
effectively, that's what an inflation slowdown actually means. Inflation is the rate at which prices move up. And a simple example is what is the percentage change maybe from last year to this year? If you say
Hmm.
cooking oil, let's hypothetically say a bottle of cooking oil moves up from 100 kwacha to 120 kwacha. We say that is a 20% inflation of the price within a year. You see what I
Hmm.
mean? So we just take the price that something was last year versus the price that it is this year. So I think where people get confused is when we say inflation is coming down, they confuse inflation, which is the speed at which prices move up, with prices themselves. When prices move negative or they come down, that's called deflation. So what we have is slower inflation or
Hmm.
manageable inflation. That's the simple explanation that everyone just needs to look at. So the simple thing I can always tell you is this: if a car slows down, does it move backwards? No, it doesn't.
Hmm.
It just moves slower. So that's what coming down in inflation effectively means.
Okay, thank you so much. And you had that brilliant analogy about a balloon. Could you just talk us through that before we
It's
get
very
into the
simple,
next?
yeah.
Yeah.
And this is what I would tell everyone. In fact, the word inflation, think of it the same as inflating a balloon. If you
Hmm.
blow air into a balloon, if you blow it really fast, the balloon will expand fast. If you blow it slower, it will just expand slower. It doesn't mean that if you blow air into a balloon slower, it'll all of a sudden shrink. So I think that's where we're also getting it wrong again. So consider it the pace at which consider prices like a balloon. Okay. And
Hmm.
inflation is the rate at which air is entering the balloon and how fast those prices are growing. Now, the biggest question I think everyone always has on their mind is, where does inflation come from?
Hmm.
That's obviously the big question that everyone always trying to grapple with. Where does it come from and why do we face it? The simple answer is, when you have more money, in other words, cash, in an economy than you do have things, there's inflation. So I want you to think about a very simple example. Imagine with me, you're sitting in Mkushi or Serenje somewhere, and there's
Hmm.
only one tomato farmer who supplies tomatoes for everyone. Now there's a shortage of tomatoes, but everyone has cash to buy tomatoes. What happens to the price of those tomatoes? They start to move
Yes,
up
that's up.
because there's more cash wanting tomatoes than there
Hmm.
are tomatoes. What happens if the farmer planted so many tomatoes that it was in excess and he needs to get rid of them before they rot? The farmer drops the prices to get rid of them. So when there's more products than cash, you get deflation. Prices start to come down. When there's more cash than products, you get inflation, because the prices, the cash, the amount of cash chasing after products is like the air going into a balloon, pushing those prices up. And it's a very
Mm.
simple thing. That's exactly how our economy works. When there's a lot of money in the economy and there's not enough productivity, prices of things go up. And when there's
Mhm.
very little, prices of things go down, or prices of things either go up or they slow down. The rate
Mhm.
at which they go up slows down. That's what we always need to remember. So we don't have a situation where there's more money than there is where there's more things than money. We don't have that yet. Countries
Yeah.
like Japan have that. Countries like Germany for a while had that, but not Zambia. We didn't have that.
No. As you can hear now, the noise in the opposition sphere is that Hakainde Hichilema is making people not have money. And There's no money in the circulation. Why? How would you explain the reason why there isn't money in circulation at the moment in Zambia?
Because that's what's slowing down inflation. You can explain inflation actually 40% by excessive money in circulation. So let's take a step back. Okay, let's take a step back for a little bit about how much money went into circulation. So let me just break things down first before I go into that, as to where your sources of inflation comes from. So about 40 to 50% of inflation comes from the amount of money in the economy when there's too much cash.
Yeah.
Another or so 20% comes from energy costs, where the cost of fuel and energy goes up. Stuff that we don't even produce as a country. We don't produce oil. So that's the main source of energy. The next form of inflation, the next source of inflation will be what we call supply chain problems, like what you see happening around the world. And I'm sure you're feeling it in the UK, you're feeling it in America, everyone, because things are expensive coming in. Raw materials are becoming expensive. So when supply chains don't work, in other words, when you have things struggling to move, like right now, ships, just moving ships from China to Egypt, for example, has gone triple the cost it used to be last year. So just shipments are the biggest problem. Ships are not leaving China because of the COVID restraints and the backlogs that we're having. I'm sure people have ordered stuff from Amazon there and all those areas, and you found that it's taking long for things to even get there. So those are the backlogs that you're finding, and every country is facing this. And then to make it worse, we have a war that's happening in Europe that's also causing a lot of these supply chain problems, getting further and further entrenched. So I think where the problem that everyone is getting is that you have to make sure that the supply chains are efficient as well. And then the fourth source of inflation, which also causes about 20% of inflation, is regulation. Excessive regulation slows down how many people can produce things. So remember, the key to controlling prices is having more things than money. So anything that stops things from being produced causes inflation, and excess money in the economy causes inflation. So that's all we're looking at. Anything that stops things from being made causes inflation. Regulation, supply chain problems, energy costs going up, or anything where we have too much money being put into the system causes inflation. Now, starting from that point, let's go back to where this inflation came from. Because last year we had massive inflation, especially starting in 2020 going into 2021. And that was because we went on a printing cycle. What people don't know in Zambia is 60% of all the cash that has been created was created over the last 2 years. Okay, literally, people just went on a cycle, just literally creating money, throwing it through the banking system with no productivity to back it up. So what did you think was going to happen when all this cash finally hits the streets? Bang, prices start running up. And what you can see is that over the last set of months, there's been a removal of money from the system to kind of curb, because that's how you curb inflation. And I think whether it's in England, whether it's in America, whatever country, you've heard your central banks going for interest rate hikes, increasing interest rates. Your mortgages are going up, your car payments are going up, all these things are going up, specifically because they're trying to slow down your spending, because that's causing inflation, because the supply chains from China, where all the production is being done, is causing inflation. So the world is experiencing inflation because there's too much money in the system. At the same time, there's too little stuff. So if we fix this problem of the imbalance between things and money and get more things out and get less money out in the system, we can actually start to curb inflation. Now, who printed that money that was sitting in this economy and basically inflated it are the same people who are basically mocking it? That's the nature of politics. But let's just follow the numbers. The money supply has been drained down to so as we've gone into single digit inflation, it's also because money growth has also gone into single digit. So the one thing that started from the beginning is they slowed down the amount of money that was being created in order to attack inflation. So that's the first thing that's been done right now. And yes, it has an effect that there's no cash in the streets, but it's that very cash in the streets that caused inflation in the first place.
Yeah. Already we are having some of our viewers up in arms. You guys have lost the
Linda,
plot.
is there a way that he can cut and come back? That way we can get him.
Just a second, Aka. I'll just for order, I will put you on the spotlight so that you know it's your turn, if that's all right. Welcome to the program, actually, Akashambato. It's lovely to see you. Thanks for joining us. Aka, can you hear me? Mr. Mutwale, can you hear me?
I can hear you very clearly.
Okay, so it's just Aka. Aka, can you hear me? Okay, he probably can't. I will move on. As I was saying, that we've got some of our viewers up in arms, saying you guys have lost the plot. You're trying to explain things. People are feeling the pinch, and we want to start from the basics. So just bear with us as we explain this step by step, and we'll get to the points that people are anxious. They want to hear about the hike in fuel prices. But I think it's important for Mr. Mtwale to explain his way through step by step so that you'll be able to understand exactly where all this is coming from. Now, would you now say that there's good inflation or healthy inflation?
So when you get to, so inflation actually does have a place in society. It's a painful thing when you think about it as a consumer, but it actually has a place in society because too little inflation disincentivizes people from making things. Let me give you a simple example. If the prices of tomatoes don't go up, you won't find more people plant. But when tomato prices went up, and I remember there was that record time where people were even posting pictures saying paying lobola with tomatoes because of
Yes.
how expensive they were. What ended up happening is more people planted tomatoes because they were inspired by the price. So when the price of things goes up because there's excess demand, it signals to the business community that we need to do more work to meet demand. It's actually a signal to entrepreneurs. When entrepreneurs see inflation in a sector of the economy, then that means there's excess demand that is untaken care of. So that means there's a market room for them to enter into. So it's a signal from an entrepreneurial perspective. But you don't want inflation to be too high. What you want is minimal and manageable inflation. That's what we want. We want minimal and manageable inflation so that it incentivizes entrepreneurs to create things, but does not destroy consumers' abilities to buy things. So, and then the second most important thing also is you want inflation to grow at a slower pace than your wages. That's really it. Because the number one thing you can do, the only thing, not politicians, not policy, not nothing, the only thing an individual can do to defend themselves from inflation is to grow their income faster.
Yeah.
So what you want is
which leads me to the next question. I was going to ask you, should we be focusing more on household income growth rather than inflation in that case?
Yeah, that's what we should be doing. We should be focusing, and ironically, that is what we're actually doing as people. And I'm not talking about just even government, as individuals. This is what we're doing. We're advising everyone: start your businesses, get started, get moving. It's a tough environment. Nobody can ever take that away from anyone. It's a really sticky environment to start your business in. But the truth of the matter is, those are the businesses that make it through and grow resilience. But the reality is, the more people that get into the business world and the more people that open their doors and the more demand there is for labor, because this is what we need. We need more businesses who can have demand for labor. And maybe these are the things that we're all hoping that is under focus. We've seen trade deals, things like that trying to be opened up. Okay. When a country trades with other countries, income is generated in that country. So things like if your agri-produce ends up in Kenya, that's dollars and extra income that comes into Zambian businesses and into Zambian homes and is paid to Zambian workers. So that's what we need to start doing. We need to trade more. We need to open more businesses, and we need more competition. Now, I want to just preface this by also saying one of the key things that is that when people think about why do prices fail to come down, but I think that's what everybody gets very itchy about. What is it that stops prices from coming down? Because when they say, no, but the cost of these things are stabilized, how come the prices are staying up? Well, it's very simple. What pushes prices up is not what brings them back down. That's what I think everybody doesn't understand. What brings prices down is business competition. Think about it. If you're in business, okay, and your cost of production has gone down, but you've gotten people used to buying at a high price and you're making more profit, why would you cut the prices? You're a business person. You're trying to make as much profit as possible. The things that make business people drop their prices is competition. Okay? That's what we need to also remember. So we need entrepreneurs competing with each other so that the moment cost of production comes down, that's what drives the cost of things down. So this is why a lot of us in the sectors are calling for business deregulation. Okay, so that the red tape that is in between an entrepreneur deciding to get started and getting started is minimal. That's what we need right now, because the entrepreneurs will innovate and push the prices down to compete against each other. And that's how you get prices coming down and prices being maintained and controlled.
Indeed. I'm going to ask you to hold your thoughts on that one. So cutting down red tape, bureaucracy, and various other things to encourage entrepreneurship. Aka, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Linda. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
There's very little to add here. Mr. Mutwale, he's explaining things that are easy for anyone to understand out there. And it's very interesting. Thank you for coming, Mr. Mutwale. And we are excited to have you here.
Okay. So do you have anything to add before we move on to the next question? Do you have any questions to ask him?
No. Well, I just want to amplify what he has said, because a lot of times people think that, especially in Zambia, people think that the government should be able to intervene and reduce prices. That's not how it works. Like Mr. Mutwale said, prices generally, and I want to just kind of add on to what he has just said, prices in the economy generally don't come down. And I think that point, that point must be also emphasized. What we are looking for, like he said, is growth in wages. Growth in wages, the percentage at which there's growth in wages should be higher than the percentage change in inflation rate. Okay, that is a very, very important point. Number two, we also want economic growth. How do we measure that? Through GDP. Because economic growth and growth in productivity and production increases job availability. And so when he's talking about growing the jobs, growing the wage rate, there's two areas you can do that. Number one is encourage businesses to increase wage, pay wages better, pay workers better pays. And secondly, expanding the economy. When you expand the economy, you grow employment. So those that are not in the employment, in the job market, begin to join the job market, begin to get a living wage, and then they begin to spend on normal goods.
Okay. Now, Aka, just on that point, how can businesses pay better wages if there's no money in circulation and they're not making enough money themselves?
Well, first it goes back to the issue of making the environment competitive and making the investments climate good for businesses to thrive. That is, you have to get rid of economic leakages. You have to get rid of corruption. You have to make sure that regulatory environment, like Mr. Mutwale was saying, is easy for businesses to start and succeed. Okay, when you remove those bottlenecks and regulatory bottlenecks, you create an environment where entrepreneurs actually can thrive. Because let me tell you this, the other thing that you do when you do that, you reduce the cost of doing business. Okay, every time you remove bottlenecks, you remove corruption, which is a leakage, you actually take care of some of the costs that businesses incur in starting a business and actually vying for those tenders, those government tenders, right?
And the actual running of the business itself.
And the actual running of the so if you and me, Linda, want to get it, we are new entrepreneurs in the market, and we want to apply for a tender, a government tender. Okay, if You, Linda, decides, oh, I'm going to pay Mr. XYZ 10,000 kwacha to get the tender. And I'm not paying the XYZ anything. I'm more likely to lose the tender. You will get the tender, but you're going to get the tender at a very high cost. It has costed you an extra 10,000 kwacha to get that tender. So when you go into the market and begin to implement activities of your business, you're going to want to recoup that 10,000 kwacha. How do you do it? You charge more. So you then allocate that 10,000 kwacha on your products and charge government more because you want to recoup that 10,000 that you gave Mr. XYZ, who is a government official who wanted a kickback.
Okay.
So that point is very important. You remove that. When you remove that leakage, we call it economic leakage. When you remove economic leakage, you actually make doing business 10,000 cheaper.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, I want to take you gentlemen down to the basics, because obviously it's all well and good for us to be discussing businesses and entrepreneurship and starting and running a business, but there's you know, not interested in any of those things. She's just worried that she can't afford to feed her children. She can't afford to take her products. Valashisha tomato, she can't afford to take it from point A to point B because everything is expensive. Petrol is expensive. Gas is expensive. Hence, bus fares will be expensive. How do you explain to someone who's at the receiving end and commodities are literally going off the roof, so to speak? The prices are going off the roof. How do you explain to that person why they're going through that and for how long, and what the government is doing to mitigate that?
There's very little you can say to somebody who's going through a price hike, without sounding too artsy. That's the unfortunate part of it. It is because it is a painful experience to see your wages and your income grow at a slower pace. Whether you're selling things at the market,
are going high, but your wages are still stagnant or not increasing at all.
Exactly. It is a very painful thing, unfortunately, to deal with that, because so we have to acknowledge the pain. Okay, we have to acknowledge that it is a painful experience. But here's the me being the open side of it. We always call upon government to then intervene with prices. The problem with price interventions is that they cause shortages because it disincentivizes production again. That's the problem that I think everybody struggles to understand. Let's go back to last year when we were intervening with fuel. And I know we're going to talk about it later. But look, let's go back to last year when we intervened with fuel and we intervened with milli meal. When our government stepped in, went to people's shops and said, you can't sell milli meal above certain prices. What was the next problem we started to find? We found there was no milli meal in shops. Okay, we now had shortages. So I always ask people this question: what would you rather have? Expensive stuff or nothing? Because that's the other option when governments intervene and start to stem prices of things. So that's kind of what we're going through. Now, what do you say to that person? There's nothing you can say to comfort them, but what you can try and do, and we go back to the business angle, it's not that everyone has to become an entrepreneur. It's that the entrepreneurs of society have to step up and create higher paying jobs. Let me just give you a simple chart. And I'll go through this chart, how I've talked about it, that when you deregulate barriers, when you deregulate businesses or you remove bottlenecks, you decrease the barriers. Now, what we find about deregulation is always funny. Where there's very little regulation, there's a lot of activity. Think of Kantembas. Very little regulation in Kantembas, so there's a Kantemba in every corner of the country. Very huge regulations in insurance, so we've got a limited amount of insurance. Where there's little barriers, there's lots of activity. When you decrease the barriers, you increase the number of people competing. There are two things competitors do. They compete against each other on price, and then they compete with each other for labor. That's there are two forms of competition which we don't pay attention to. One is that my competitor is always trying to undercut me to get my customers, but my competitor is fighting with me for workers. And when there's increased demand for labor, there's increased wages. And then we've corrected that issue where wages have grown faster than inflation. So if we can get business creation to compete on price while also competing for labor, we're pushing up wages and pushing down prices at the same time and creating disposable income and increased affordability. That's what the person wants. The average person wants to be able to afford more things.
Yeah.
Okay, they want to be able to afford more things every year. Doesn't matter how much money they get, whatever. They just want to feel like they're getting more than they were getting last year, and they want to feel like they're able to consume more, enjoy more, or save more than they were able to last year. That only happens when wages grow faster, and that happens with businesses competing for customers and competing for labor. And that can only happen when you remove the barriers and you make the markets efficient and easier. So it boils down to this. Money comes from jobs. Money comes from customers and business. We can't get away from that. People make money by selling things and doing things. So if we can get more people selling things and doing things, they'll hire people to sell things and do things with them, pay those people more, and those people end up being able to afford more things. That's how you correct the issue. But it takes, you see, the problem in Zambia is we've gotten used to money from the sky. And this is why the solutions are always, they're always more harmful. These blessing money that comes from nowhere. So we have to, what we're trying to look at, I think, from now on is how to structure the economy so that it's a production center. It's not just a cash center, but we're not producing things whereby we have wood, but we have to import toothpicks. We're trying to avoid that culture again, so that as we kind of slow down on import, we're able to then put our people to work and give them more money for the work that they are doing, as opposed to importing things and making them wonder if they can ever afford them.
Yeah, so it's definitely going to be a very painful experience. And I think we have to be very honest and open about this. There's no free money that is going to fall off the sky from anywhere. It's like I say, Vanavavo, it's time to roll up our sleeves and start working. You know, we're going to face a few rough bumps. It's going to hurt quite a bit. I'll give you an example of a household. There's a couple, and you want to go for further studies, so you sacrifice one salary, both of you work. So for instance, the husband stays at home and looks after the family, the wife goes back to university. So you've got one salary. You tighten your belt. Things are not going to be the same. You won't be able to afford, if you are in Chipata, Hungry Lion every 5 days or whatever. So it means you're going to have to cut down on certain things and just tighten your belts and try and get through that. Now, I know you've given quite an eloquent and very broad explanation about wages and inflation. Just for the benefit of our viewers, could you just, in very simplistic terms, explain the relationship between wages and the actual inflation?
Oh, that can be done quite simply. Your earnings every month are basically, that's your wages, your income. Let's actually call it that. So if you're earning 5,000 kwacha a month, and your cost of and your rent, for example, was 2,000, okay? What happens if your salary stays at 5,000, but your rent moves up to 2,500? That's 500 kwacha worth of savings or spending that you were able to do that you have to remove from your budget. And that's a painful experience. So what you want is that if your rent goes up by 2,500, to 2,500, your salary has also moved up to 6,000. That's what you want. Because remember that after rent, the first time when we said 2,000 rent, 5,000 salary, you had 3,000 kwacha left for spending. What you want is now, if you have 6,000 salary, 2,500 rent, you've got 3,500 for spending. You've got more that you can actually do. You see what I mean now? So as prices move up, what you want to be able to do is be able to afford more things. You don't want prices to move up so that you're not able to afford things anymore. And you have to start cutting your budget. Everyone knows that painful conversation when you're sitting as a couple and you're cutting things off of your budget, you're removing things, your shopping trolley is getting thinner and thinner. That's what's happened. Now, over the last 10 years, this is what the Zambian people have felt. Inflation has moved faster than their wages. Like real wages in Zambia, we studied this. Real wages per hour have been 9 kwacha per hour, and they've stayed there. And what that means is that the real purchasing power of a Zambian hour of work, in other words, when you go to work for 1 hour and you're able to buy, has not changed. Because every time your salary has gone up, inflation has moved up even faster. In fact, in some points, it's even getting negative. Last year, salaries only moved up by 6%, but inflation was moving up by 20%. So think about that. Your costs went up by 20%, but you only got a 6% salary hike, meaning you had to start removing things from your monthly budget, and you had to now start downsizing your life. And that's the painful effect that makes people anxious, irritated, and angry. So that's why we must focus on wage growth faster than inflation, and also putting competition to hold that down.
Thank you so much. And on that one, would you advise people to start side hustles, maybe to compensate, or
Linda,
that lost income?
Linda,
Can I just let Mr. Mtuka respond to that one? Then come on.
Yeah.
Would you encourage
Sure.
people to start side hustles, and how can they conduct that in able to ensure that they don't cut off too much from their budget?
You know who survives inflation? Performance-based people. People who don't make fixed pay, they make a flexible pay. In other words, you make it based on stuff that you want, like where you deliver and you push out deliverables. That's how people actually survive inflation much better. So side hustles are very good in order to create it. So just find something that you can do, be as flexible. The reality of Zambia is almost everyone is self-employed. So you really have to just push yourself to start selling and doing as much as you can during this. It's a painful thing to say, but you have to tough it out and get through it, because the only defense you have against inflation is your salary, is growing your salary and growing your income. That's the only defense you have. So side hustles will help you. They will help work wherever you can.
Okay.
And
try and make sure you go for
I wanted
performance-based work.
And that's very, very good answers from Mr. Mtwale. I wanted to add another aspect to this discussion of just an addition to what he's saying, is yes, 100%, I agree. We need to make sure that there is the wage growth is actually either mirroring inflation rate or at least beating inflation rate. However, you can only have wage growth if you are in the labor market. If you are participating in the labor market, that only applies to those that work. Majority of Zambians, of the Zambians out there, don't have, gainful employment. And so a lot of them, like he said, a lot of them are involved in cross-border trades, especially if you live in a far-flung areas that are closer to borders, that we border, 9 countries or so. A lot of those communities are involved in cross-border trade. And a lot of Zambians are actually very small, Tuntemba type of businesses. And so when we talk, and that's why in our discussions, we should always pivot to that population, because at the end of the day, they are the majority. Okay. And so how do this discussion actually affect them? Well, it goes back to the issue of growth in the economy, expansion of the economy. I've always insisted that the only way that we are going to bring as many people as possible into the job market to have gainful employment is to expand the economy. And some of the things that have been mentioned here by Mr. Mtwale are things that are going to actually allow expansion of economic activities. When he talks about get into selling and trading, that is expansion of economic activities. However, the other thing that I want to advise a lot of Zambians out there is make sure you formalize your businesses and your entrepreneurship activities, because that's when another problem comes in. The other day, I was advising someone. Someone came into my inbox and said, "Aka, I make bricks for buildings and I'm a small entrepreneur, but I'm not growing. I need CDF. I said, why do you need CDF? Why do you need CDF? If you're already doing it, why do you need CDF? Why do you need to expand? He said, no, I need to expand more businesses. I said, okay, give me an idea of how much you make every month. Your gross, give me your gross revenue. And I can give you an idea of expanding. He told me, oh no, I'm trying to expand so I can add more revenue. I said, but just tell me how much you make. Oh, I make 30,000 kwacha a month. And then I pay salaries here and there and stuff like that. I said, one of the things you need to do is you don't need CDF. You don't need an empowerment from government. You are already doing it. What you need to do is regularize your business. That's what the problem was. This person has not formalized their business such that they have no bank history from which they can actually access more capital. And so a lot of Zambian small scale trade, sell and trade, buy and trade, they are not formalized such that they are actually outside the capital market. They cannot access the capital that they need to expand. And so that's where I've been telling a lot of people, formalize your enterprises so that you can actually have access to capital markets. Mm-hmm. That is how you expand. That's how you create more employment for others. And that's how you grow your business.
Thank you, Aka. Mr. Mtwale, do you have anything to add to that?
I'd also like to add that as a country, we also need to start working on improving our supply chains to become more transparent and digital. The reason I say this is that in as much as people may think this is a fancy thing, there's something around the world which everyone has acknowledged called the Amazon effect. And one of the reasons why even America for a long period of time faced persistent low inflation before this whole breakout happened from energy costs and everything and supply chains from COVID was that they had an economy transforming itself into digitization, where a lot of things were happening online, and they kind of had those kind of those transactions. Let me give you a simple example what I mean by this. Some of the inflation that we find, for example, in food, is because along the supply chain. I used to be a commodity broker in maize and even in soya, trying to get something from a farm to a factory. You have cadres in between. You have in-between inefficiencies. You have so many people because it's done out of sight. If you can bring things into proper trading platforms, even things like maize, anything like that, you'll be shocked how much you can actually get an improvement even in price management. And you can get an improvement in in price reduction because you're able to do comparisons. Think about if you go on an online search for whatever you want to buy, you are actually able to compare prices very easily. So, and then secondly, you are able to get rid of intermediaries. In Zambia, we've got nuisance intermediaries who hike up the cost. And like I said, you try and get a bag of maize out of Eastern Province, trying to get it into a milling plant in Lusaka to try and get milli meal made. You've got a DC this side who wants to grab money. You've got somebody here this side. You've got political cadres who are trying to grab money and saying, add my cost, add my cost, add my cost. And all of a sudden, a bag of maize is coming out 4 times the price. The farmer is still getting nothing. And then keeping them poor in an impossibly expensive environment, while the milling plant has to take in very expensive maize, which it passes on to the household. So if you try and clear out these supply chains and remove the problems, as he talked about, the economic leakages, okay, these corruption-based economic leakages, if we can remove some of these things, then we can actually get some of the problems getting sorted out. Even when you're talking about trying to get more people into the economy and more people into gainful employment, once again, the small entrepreneur, to actually get them to grow, because once a small business, I think we underestimate small businesses. Small businesses hire uneducated people, non-college educated people, because they've got leaner budgets. It's small businesses who hire young people. It's small businesses who hire people who don't have the greatest education, because they are willing to train people, because they don't have the greatest budget to get the biggest, most expensive professionals. They are willing to go through the cycle and try and help people. So before we start fighting this, we need to get as many small businesses moving, growing, even if you have to, even just getting those businesses that hire 2 to 3 people to get started and get going. But actually, to help this, and I know I think we've lost in but to help this, I actually had a few points. This is something that we pointed out before. Things that could help in terms of policy, cheaper licensing. The average Zambian startup at a radio station I work at, we actually did a survey and found the average startup starts with a budget of 5,000 kwacha. So if you can actually just put a blanket policy saying that no licensing fee should exceed that amount, or in fact, they should fit into that budget and do what's called a fit within test. Every single licensing regulatory authority should not be charging more than 5,000 kwacha. In fact, should not be charging in excess of that. You actually have a lot more people being able to start businesses in almost every industry, and then you get that increased competition. 2-year free trial licenses. There was something we spoke about where licensing costs. I mean, this was a campaign before, where this is something that would actually ease the pressure. If you said, as we're going through this inflation cycle, we're going to make sure that every regulator waives licenses for the first 2 years of doing businesses, or we do that 25% graduated cost structure, where you only pay 25% of your costs and your licensing fees going up for the first 5 years of doing business. That also helps stir up a lot of entrepreneurship, lower the entry standards so that people who have budgets of 5,000 kwacha to start businesses are not forced to seek excessive capital. These are things that can be done right now without having to strain the economy. Offer tax discounts to any business that does business with small entrepreneurs. Give tax incentives to big businesses and tell them, we can give you a 10% discount on your tax bill payable if you can show us that 50% of your procurement contracts are to youth and women-owned businesses in Zambia. These are winning things that we can do. 20% tax discounts to banks if they give out, if 35% or 40% of their loan portfolio is small businesses. These are things we can do now. That conversation about allowing people to withdraw half of their NAPSA contributions. If you're in the entrepreneurial space and you've put it there and you want a bit of starting capital, you issue it through the banks, you make someone pitch a business plan, they can access some of their capital to start their businesses. Just these 7 things would get a lot of the pressure off the prices and would get a lot of the momentum onto the business sector, where we can create the jobs, grow the incomes, and beat the inflation.
Let me add as well, just where you've ended, I've been propagating a very simple policy. It doesn't even cost government anything. I said, in fact, last year, was that another way to do this, decongest the urban areas. Okay, you are all the businesses are coming to Lusaka. Everyone wants to be in Lusaka. Everyone wants to be in Kitwe and Ndola, Livingston. The way to decongest these areas and allow rural areas to benefit from economic activities is to give a tax sliding incentive, where if, for instance, corporate tax is, if corporate tax is 25%, it is going to be 25% if you are in Lusaka or any urban area. If you establish a milling plant in Chibombo district, if you establish a milling plant in Petauke or Chama district in Eastern Province, you get a 15% tax rate, corporate tax rate. You're sliding. What you're giving these guys is an incentive to put plants in rural areas where they actually need it. Okay? If you reduce cost for rural dwellers, let's say, for example, you get a plant and put it at Katete district, or a milling plant. It's got access to a highway that you can easily transport that milling back into Lusaka or anywhere, or to Chipata. It's centrally located. What you need to do is, once you do that, but you got to give them those incentives. You got to give them an incentive to put that plant in Katete. When they do that, imagine a milling plant in Katete that is employing 150 people. What you have now is 150 people who have a very good job with a milling plant in Katete. What are they going to need? They're going to need housing. You have indirectly created demand for housing in Katete by those 150 people. Those 150 people who start demanding housing. What do developers do? Start making a proper modern housing for that particular population. It might be small, but if you do it for 3, 4, 5 companies across Zambia, you decongest Lusaka, you decongest Ndola and these other areas. And so the government has to be proactive. And this is a challenge for ministers. This is a challenge for entities such as the National Housing Authority and others to be creative in the way that we create products, okay? Either in the real estate market or in the financial markets. Okay, somebody was telling me, oh, fuel prices is creating a lot of uncertainty. I told them, I said, do you know that here in the United States of America, we make money out of uncertainty? Just the way that you have said uncertainty, that's money itself. Because all I have to do is create a futures market for uncertainty to leverage and aid those uncertainties and trade those future products.
Yeah, thank you, Aka. Very important points that you have made, especially with the way the government has decentralized the CDF. So that makes perfect sense. So different districts can capitalize on that. Now, I'll be playing devil's advocate here. It's all well and good talking about all those brilliant ideas. And I think this is what the government currently is trying to do, to create that fertile environment for businesses to flourish and to reduce bureaucracy and just improve productivity and cut down on corruption just generally, so that business can flourish and get the economy running. But do you think there's something that the government can do at the moment to mitigate the impact of this terribly high cost of living for people who are not even in employment, some young people who don't even know where the next meal is going to come from, no hope of starting a business, they're not in viable education institutions? Do you think there's something that the government can or should do right now to mitigate this crazy situation?
Well, go ahead, Mr. Bitwa.
The first problem we have with the intervention, and this is why I keep saying, in as much as we want interventions, and as much as nobody wants people to suffer, okay? Nobody wants people to suffer.
People are suffering, and we want to be sincere and acknowledge the fact that they're suffering instead of us just giving platitudes because we've got the luxury of having good paid jobs. There are people, Mashanti compounds, they don't have electricity, they don't have running water, they don't even have food. Some of them, and we're talking about creating this healthy environment for business to flourish. What about those people? Where can they start from? Is there something the government can do?
And this is why I said the first, look, Ronald, and the toughest line about this was the truth. Ronald Reagan actually said this. The greatest social program in this world is a job. Okay? It meets your food needs, it meets your housing needs, it meets your everything. We can talk about short-term interventions. We've tried all these social cash transfers. We tried everything. We've tried meeting people with minimal pay. We've tried everything as a country. Aid has flown through Africa. Do you know that no continent gets as much aid as we do? Yet it has never eradicated poverty. Never.
Never.
We've
never. Moyo wrote a very important book about dead eggs.
Exactly.
I think it would be very important for a lot of our leaders to read that book again.
So giving the problem with cash handouts and cash support is that it does not create sustainability in a person's abilities, because you're giving them enough money for the month, but the month is going to end. And then what happens the next month? Then what happens the next month? And what you're doing is, even in America, there are complaints about this, too many payments that are disincentivizing work and creating labor inflation. So you don't want to create disincentives, because we did this, by the way, over the last 5 years. Do you realize that we've had the greatest labor exit in Zambia, where we had a lot of people just exit the labor force, where our labor force count just plummeted? especially young men, they just exited the labor force and entered cadreism because that was now the way to make quick money instead of creating job environments. So you have to create business environments, and unfortunately, we can't shortcut the process, because every time we shortcut the process, we stunt it. We get into a situation like this where we have to have this conversation again. This country is going to have to go through a very painful period of building businesses which create jobs, which pay incomes and wages to people. And that's why I said earlier on, small businesses are the ones who hire people from the compounds. They hire college kids out of school because they don't have the big enough budgets to go and hire expensive professionals. They try and get people, they hire laborers, they hire young people to train them. That's what they do. So we need as many small businesses moving through the system, hiring as growing and moving. Now, if they're not doing that, you're going to try and ask government to intervene. Government's going to have to start printing money. Okay, this is the problem. They're going to have to start printing money in order for them to meet the costs of social support. Then when that cash gets into the system, guess what? We've got more cash than things. What happens? Inflation is back again. So you actually create inflation with this, with aid actually creates inflation. Okay, because you're giving people cash where they have not produced anything, and therefore now you've got a problem where you've got excess cash and underproduction. So a job is the first thing you have to do to sort out this problem. Even China recognizes that they had to use a communist country, realized they had to use a capitalist system to move from 98% poverty. Think about that. China was at 98% poverty in the early 80s, while Zambia was in the 80%. China is down to 20% because they used a capitalist business system and made it easy for people to start businesses, grow their businesses, hire the Chinese, move people out of the rural areas into the urban areas, put them in jobs, put them in savings, and move people out of the poverty problem. Jobs, businesses. This is what we need to focus on first so that we can defeat inflation and defeat poverty.
There are no shortcuts, Linda.
No shortcuts.
There are no shortcuts. We can sit here and say, bring back subsidies, from which subsidies cost money. They cost a lot on the treasury, the money that government doesn't have. And so the idea that we are going to continuously develop on alms and gifts and grants is an illusion.
It's time for us to roll up our sleeves and get to work. It's going to be tough, Vanavavo, but we've got to do this. If you're just joining us, thank you so much. I have Mr. Mnyumbe Mutwale and Akashambatwa and myself, Linda Banks, discussing the current state of affairs in our country. Fuel hikes, inflation, deflation, employment, business, and all things Zambia. So we're going to take a few minutes just to have a look at what our viewers are saying. There's quite a lot of comments, and I would invite my guests and my co-host Aka to pick a few topics and just answer some of these questions and points that people are raising. Too much black tax among us Zambians. Actually, Aka, you are in diaspora. Can you pick that one up very quickly for me, please? Black tax. How do you think it's acting as a barrier? If I could just do the questioning so that we don't have too many questions, and just for the sake of order, Aka, do you want to pick that up? Because I think a lot of people in diaspora have been talking about black tax. Actually, Mr. Mutwala, I didn't even ask where you're based. Are you based in Lusaka?
I am, but I was raised outside for most of my life. Yes.
Where were you?
I know that South Africa and Botswana.
Oh, fantastic. So I'll give you an opportunity to talk about that. How is it a hindrance to a blossoming economy? Or how is it a hindrance to someone who's trying to get into business, black tax?
Look, every society has a form of social support, okay, or their version of black tax. I think we've seen it in the Indian community, for example, but they don't give you cash, they don't give you food, they help you start a business. That's actually what they do in their societies. And actually, Asian societies generally do that. If you want support, they give you business support, not cash and handout support. They'll frequent your establishment or become your customer in order to give you a flow of business, and they'll give you a network of suppliers. But cash, they will just not do. That's what they try and avoid doing by all costs, because they realize that it just doesn't work as a society. So what, in terms of black tax, I've seen what they're saying, that it is a very expensive thing in society. But I think I'll just use what Steve Harvey said once: best thing you can do for poverty is not join it. So the first thing you've got to do is make sure you stay out of it. Make sure you are able to help people, not become one of those in need of help. That's just financial advisory to put down there. But the other part is we need to start looking at how to help people in business sense, and in more sustainable ways than a cash handout, even amongst families. Because once we start doing that, once again, we're back at cash handouts month on month, and it's unsustainable.
Yeah, that's a very important point that you've raised. Before I just bring in Aka, you find people in diaspora, when someone has sadly passed away, and we are brilliant at doing this. Aka, you attest to this. We give endlessly when someone has died, to get them from whichever part of the world they're in back home to fly the body. And I've been thinking lately, why do we not do the same when we're still alive? I mean, someone comes in and want to start a business, we all rally together and put little coins so that that person starts a business. Then we move on to another person. Aka, whilst responding to black tax, could you just allude to the points that I've just raised? Why do you think?
Let me tell you. Let me give you my personal philosophy to help answer the question. I have a large extended family back home. One thing I have done, and I've said to every one of them, is I will support you to get an education. Because I know if we have 10 educated Lewanikas and Katebes, we are going to spread the family wealth. And we can shoulder each other's burdens. And so what I've done is I've picked up one or two siblings and said, I'm going to put you through school. And once I finish, when you get again for employment, you support the next person. It goes back to what Mr. Mtwale was talking about. It's about creating an ecosystem of support. We used to have this as Africans.
Paying it forward.
Right. You get your nephew, bring your nephew into your house, educate your nephew, send them out. That nephew is going to educate another nephew, and you have an ecosystem of family support. What has happened to that? What has happened is that when we liberalized the economy and we became a free enterprise, people pursuing their personal interests, we got to a point where through that adjustment, our economy tanked so much that poverty made us unable to do that, even at individual and family level. So what do? We relied so much on government support. So everyone now is no longer asking or expecting an uncle to help. They're expecting government to help. And it is a huge cost on the treasury. I'll come back to the issue of, look, if you have a privilege, and I've said this many times, if you do have an opportunity as a member of any Zambian family and you are able to support one child to school, do it. That child, once educated, will support 4 or 5 other family members on average in Zambian communities.
Lovely, thank you so much. Now I got caught by this comment by Mr. Oscar Pombo, who is also one of the regular TVBAKWETU participants. Somehow the poor people are put quiet. Even CDF is benefiting people who have already got capital. It's wrong. Who wants to take this one up?
Well, CDF, again, has been decentralized in the way that it's being managed. Central government is really, and this is the truth, and I'll go back to what Mr. Mtwale said. The only way we can save our people is telling them the truth. And the truth is this: central government has put up guidelines, and they have said, here is the money. You as a community, together with your MP, sit down and pick projects that are in your local area and implement them. That's what the government has done. So I always challenge people. Why are you complaining? Why can't you? There is constituency offices in each constituency. Parliament has made it a point that an MP should have an office in the constituency there where they come from. Put your leaders to task at local level. Me, when I lived in Livingston, every time I knew my MP, at that time it was Sakwiba Scott. Every time Sakwiba Scott was in Livingston, I was at his office.
Okay.
I was asking him questions. I was asking budget questions. I was asking what project is he doing. I put him to task. Please take time to put your constituent MPs and those district development committees that are actually managing constituent development funds, put them to task.
Thank you, Aka. Looks like you're wanted. Someone is calling you. Did you want to add to that comment?
So when it comes to constituency development funds, we need to go back to what's the purpose of them. The purpose of constituency development funds is to create decentralized employment. Unfortunately, in Zambia, 55% of the jobs in this country are held within the Copperbelt and Lusaka. Problem number one. In fact, if we're going to talk about inflation once again, as we pointed out earlier, that is the problem. Too much cash in Lusaka and Copperbelt chasing goods in this very limited space. So the point of CDF was to create a decentralized employment network. Now, in order for it to successfully do that, it needs to go, it shouldn't be a poverty program. We have to be very careful about turning CDF into a poverty program. Because when I say that, what we often do is we say money only goes to the poorest, okay? Especially the business part of CDF. There's the empowerment funds, which are meant to help start businesses in those areas, collect some of those cooperatives in order to create business and work. Because work comes from business. You can't jump this problem, people. Work without business is just not going to operate here. So you need businesses to be formed. So you have to find the best talented individuals with the best ideas who can then come and form something that operates in that area, support and fund that, and then you're able to create, you're able to do targeted development. If I just give you an example of how China does this, China got very angry that they were importing the ball for ballpoint pens from Japan. They got very angry about this, so they issued out an $18 million grant to the steel developers in China for who could come up with an actual ball, and they can then they put some money behind that specifically so that they could take Japanese jobs away and take that ball making activity into the jobs of Chinese hands and Chinese factories. You see how that switches when you're now making sure you're creating a competitive system where the best and brightest ideas are creating jobs. So it's not about government creating jobs. It's about government backing the job creators. Even let me give you a simple example. We talk about things like trying to improve income. Let me give you a very simple example of actually something that's happening right now. Your president went across the border. Our president went across the border. He went and starts negotiating food trade deals, agribusiness trade deals. What has happened when he triggered that? Zambeef in Zambia announces that they want to expand $100 million to double their capacity. Guess what doubling capacity does? Doubles the jobs created, doubles the work needed. And because they want to export food from Zambia, they're investing in their cropping division so that they can export food from Zambia into Kenya, into these areas, and meet the food needs and take advantage of the food shortages around the world. So what does that do? If Zambief can successfully access capital, which they're planning on doing of $100 million to then double their capacity, then Zambief needs more workers, they need transporters, they need truckers, they need small scale farmers, they need all these things that start to happen. And it's because the president went first, negotiated a trade deal, not he went and started giving money, negotiated a trade deal and allowed the financial system to then expand itself. And therefore jobs were created so that the unemployed can afford to make a living. That's where the end of this happens.
That's how you create jobs. That's how you create jobs.
Thank you so much. It's getting exciting just talking about job creation. And one thing I like about you guys, your conversation, you are not pinning everything down on government. Government needs to give us that. Government needs to give us this. But all government has to do really is create that healthy environment for business to thrive, for people, for citizens to be able to be innovative, to come up with ideas, business ideas, and for them to be able to access funding if needs be. Now, David has brought me quite nicely to my next point. I was going to move away from the questions and then we move back to the fuel situation. So David, he says countries which sanctioned Russia are buying their oil from Russia. How do we blame the pump price on Russia-Ukraine war? I'm lost. Who wants to? Shall we get our guests to pick that up?
When it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war and the impacts, especially on the pump price, and blaming it on it, I actually tracked the calculations of oil prices regularly, and we're actually fair priced as a country. We're actually at the actual price. Now, I know there are 2 points here, which I'm going to get through here when it comes to the pump price. Everybody looks at the fact that China is buying 50% more Russian oil. Well, that's because they're China, okay? And they're able to do that, and they've got muscle. Zambia is in the middle of a debt negotiation with America. Do you really want to start grabbing Russian oil in the middle of asking America for debt relief? They will turn around on you and sanction you as well and make life very tough for you. We have a $3 billion debt that we owe to Wall Street. We are depending on the Western world to try and help us negotiate through that. Okay, that's an unfortunate situation we found ourselves in because people decided to borrow like it was a game for the last 10 years, and now we're in this situation. So we don't have the wiggle room. India and China can go and trade with Russia as much as they want because they're India and China and they have the firepower to do that. Zambia, unfortunately, does not. Now let's pivot very quickly to the conversation about subsidies. Just as quickly on that point, because thanks for bringing that in, is that what we don't seem to understand, once again, is that we're in a debt situation. You cannot entertain subsidies while you are trying to unbundle a debt. Unfortunately, that just doesn't fly. The entities you're dealing with, they will not accept it. The reason why those subsidies are going to become very painful to deal with, one is because the amount of debt they were causing. Last year, even our domestic debt exploded. It doubled last year, just trying to manage fertilizer subsidies, because the price of fertilizer has doubled, tripled actually from 2020. Fertilizer, oil this year is up 42%. Just this year, I checked it just before I came on. So you're trying to now get into it. Let me give you an example of countries that are dealing with subsidies. Kenya is currently trying to sustain subsidies. They are begging the IMF for a $238 million bailout right now, and they're choking under the threat of it. Nigeria is bleeding $1 billion a month trying to sustain subsidies while it's trying to unbundle its debt, and it's on the verge of defaulting because of this. So if you can see what subsidies are doing to these nations, they're crippling them. How can
Aka,
we
could you,
who are in the...
Sorry, Mr. Mtwale, could you kindly just mute yourself if you're expecting a call so that we can follow the conversation? Thank you. Carry on, please.
So I was trying to say, how do we as a country manage that? So in as much as, yes, we all want the fuel price to be better. We all do. It benefits all of us. But the reality is it shouldn't be the fuel price goes down at the expense of increased debt. Because here's the simple question I always tell people. Somebody has to pay for that fuel. Somebody has to. If it's the government, it's either going to come from taxes or they're going to borrow. And if it's borrowed, it's coming from the taxes of your children. Are we that selfish as people that we're comfortable leaving a debt with our children because we didn't want to bear the pain of this situation? So the best thing I think we can do when dealing with oil is there are structural changes that need to be dealt with. And they are. There's the trade deal where we're trying to do a deal with Angola, or we're trying to buy shares in their up and coming refinery. Remember, Angola has to build 5 refineries. There's a road from, I think it's there's a city where the refinery is, all the way up to Kolwezi in DRC, which connects to Solwezi. And if we can try and get that pipeline of oil by owning part of that, which is part of what the trade negotiations are going on about, then we deal with that. But that's a long-term solution, because the problem we're facing in Zambia is we're trying to address long-term problems with short-term solutions.
Yeah.
If you're going to point at one problem that happens in the psyche of the Zambian people and the country as a whole, it's attempting to fix long-term systemic problems with short-term quick fix solutions. And this is why we're where we are.
Yeah, indeed. It's taken over 10 years to get to this mess, and we expect this to be fixed in 10 months. And I understand people getting really frustrated by that statement. And I deliberately didn't make comparisons because I was reading the various newspapers here, and Britain is in a bit of a pickle. I think a bit of a pickle is underrating it. We're in a
Record
mess.
oil.
Yeah, we are in a mess. And I was trying to look at the inflation rates and the drastic solutions that our government is trying to implement. And I just decided I'm not going to touch Britain because people will be up in arms. You cannot compare the British economy with the Zambian economy. So we will leave it at that. Now, the point I want to raise with you, Mr. Mtwale, is the fact that you had predicted 3.89% increase, but it's doubled. Why do you think that has doubled the price of fuel?
Supply chains. There are supply chain problems and processing. Refineries are limited right now. Even people who are trying to refine oil at the moment are struggling with refining oil at the moment. So even the refineries are stretched. American refineries have just reported that they're operating at 95% capacity. The UAE is talking about the fact that it's also stretched. It's also reaching its capacity. So there is even the oil surplus that we have is actually starting to shrink down to 1 million in terms of how much surplus supply there was in oil versus how much there actually is. So if you look at what's been happening altogether, my prediction was that there was going to be a hike. It was based on a few things, but what they did also mention was the finished products went up by 16%. So the crude went up by 6%, finished products went up by 16%. That means the processing costs of oil went up. That's where the problem is coming from. Even processing finished products is now becoming is actually becoming expensive as well. So we do have to work on systematically shortening the supply. So supply chains everywhere. Go to I'll say it for you. Go to a British factory, they'll complain. Supply chain cost. German factories, supply chain cost. Zambian factories, supply chain cost. Producer purchasing indices are all showing you around the world that the cost of getting products out of factories is skyrocketing because of supply chain costs.
Yeah, but also that comes from the structure of the oil commodity trading itself. You got to realize that when you talk about oil markets, the oil that you are using now was bought 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. So the oil marketing itself and the economics of oil is that you have the deliveries, that the oil that is being delivered, the products, oil products that are being delivered now were purchased 2 years ago at sometimes lower prices, especially in developed countries. And the other point that you have to remember is that Russia is part of OPEC. Okay, and OPEC decides, if you followed the politics of oil, global politics of oil, OPEC decides whether to increase production or not. And you have to think about who benefits from higher oil prices at the global scale. It's the producers. And so there is no incentive for Saudi Arabia, for Iraq, and other oil-producing countries to actually produce more and help reduce that cost of oil. So what is happening is that you have Iran, which is under sanctions. You don't have that oil on the market readily available. You have Venezuela, which is under heavy sanctions. Those are huge oil-producing countries that we don't have their oil on the market yet. And so
why can't we get Nigerian oil? Nigeria is stifling under debts, and yes, they produce oil.
They don't even refine. They don't even refine oil.
The Nigerian petroleum, in fact, Nigeria has been increasing fuel pump prices more than we are doing it.
Which is quite crazy in itself. Dr. Barbara, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, everybody. Hope you're all okay. I've been listening to the show and learning a lot, and I'm like, ooh, I learn every day. And the presenters and everyone are extremely brilliant. I just wanted to add on, or ask the economists and the people that are behind the numbers. By the way, I'm talking on behalf of the normal phone holders, because some of the information is like for the Nokia holders and the people who understand numbers.
Dr.
For
Bab, you have a better phone than I do. That is not an excuse. No, holders.
I'm talking on behalf of the brick holders, the ones still holding the other phone, So for the hiking of the prices of fuel to the rest of the world, to everybody else, you have what's happening in Ukraine. The barrels of oil have been going up, and then just recently, when the G8 were pausing recently in their meeting and laughing at Putin, they said they were not going to buy the fuel. That also has increased the fuel because America is no longer going to buy that oil, which is having an impact on everybody else. Now, to most of the people in Europe or the developed countries, they have a cushion to these things. So the poor people, the people on the lower end of the income, they have like maybe food banks, they have subsidies offered to the children. You have older people being encouraged to use their free bus passes. You have people being taught how to even drive their cars. I was reading an article today where somebody was writing on how to use your car, like avoid heavy weight in your car, avoid filling to fuel a full tank, things like that. That's information being given to people who have a bit of a help from the state. In Zambia, I think we have to be honest with what is going on. Just like an old lady today was telling me, one of the UK old ladies was telling me that I don't care what's going on in Ukraine. I don't care what's happening to the fuel. I don't even know where that is. I just want to buy my own things in my house. I just want to be able to pay for the fuel. That's the feeling of even the oldest woman in the streets in Zambia. They don't have a clue about what's going on, about whether Putin is bombing or not bombing. They don't care. As far as they're concerned, it's harder for them to buy the tomatoes in the farms. It's harder for them to do these things. How can you economists now advise the government to maybe make it a little bit cheaper for them, or maybe have concessions where cars that go to buy wholesalers should probably have cheaper fuel, or the markets to have cheaper payments. They pay council payments in the market to give them a bit of a concession while things are expensive. Maybe pay slightly less, or say that if you don't make up so much money in a day, you can pay so much. Do it in a bracket. Something like that. If you're selling just one tomato in a day, surely you shouldn't pay the same as somebody selling buckets and buckets to ShopRite. Is there anything that the government can do to
let me take that up, Linda, very quickly. Let me quickly respond to that. This is the same things that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And every time we say, what can the government do? It's not free. The doing is not free. If people think, oh, government can do something and it will be free for us, but it's a cost on the economy. Government, if you put a subsidy, you're basically asking for a subsidy. And so when you say, what can government do? Okay, can they take away a little bit of levy? That is income that you're taking away from a public service of picking trash.
Okay, Aka, how about, for how long can people be subjected to this, perhaps, to help?
To what exactly? To subject to what?
The prices are just going out of the roof, and people are bleeding.
Maybe let me give you a historic example. Everybody always talks about President Mwanawasa as a joyful memory.
Yes.
We forget the beginning years. We forget the beginning years of President Mwanawasa when he increased fuel prices by 100%. Remember that. He had to remove subsidies as well. He had to go through those HIPIC conditions, which were very, very painful for people.
Very painful.
Okay. and it was creating some sort of anger. But what offset and helped President Manawasa's legacy was growth. Once again, it comes back to the situation that the only way to offset the pain of cost is to bring in the gain of growth. That's the only way you can offset this, and that is what helped President Manawasa get through this, bring down prices, bring down everything by creating an expanded economy. Okay, so we do have to accept this. The only thing I understand everybody's talking about, there are concessions that are done, especially in European countries and developed countries. Here's the biggest difference. They have a tax base. They actually have built substantial tax bases of businesses, wealthy people who actually can then afford through their tax system to then support such initiatives, because the majority of the people in their country are needing help, are able to help themselves. In Africa, let alone Zambia, the moment you attempt that, you come to the realization that 90% of your population needs help. This is the problem. We're also dealing with an 89% in poverty society. The moment you start any free programs, how do you discern who gets help? Okay, without having to cripple your economy. That's where the problem comes. So we have to get out of the majority of our people in need in order to be able to even help people, because that's where the difference comes. When 10% of your population are elderly and so forth, or they need a bit of help, that can be managed. But in Zambia, where 90% of your population, 80% of your population are living in poverty standards, and they're in trouble, and they're in trauma effectively, where do you start help programs from? And where will you get the money from, and who will you tax? Because you know what you'll do? You'll kill the middle class again. Because that's what we end up doing in Zambia. All the help programs always go after hurting the middle class, increasing the tax burdens on the middle class, putting weird taxes like borehole taxes and all sorts of things on the middle class, so that we can channel money to trying to support the poor, because we haven't figured out that you cannot get 10% of the society to finance 90% of the poverty. You can't do that. It's just unsustainable. So we have to fix the job problem.
The PF tried to do this model. They collapsed the economy. From 2015 onwards, the economy was under severe recession. We were growing at
it became stress. That's true.
Right, let me finish my point, Linda. Let me just finish my point real quick. Okay?
Can we speak through the chair, please? Can we speak through the chair?
Yeah, can I finish my point?
Yeah.
Okay. The economy from 2015 to about up to the time that the PF left was in a recession. Okay, from 2015 onwards, the economy was growing at 3%, negative 3%. Okay, we are in red. What that means is that the economy was actually contracting. It wasn't growing. It's because of those appeasement things that the previous government used to do. When people complain, they will slap in there a subsidy to appease the people. They will appease them for 3 months, and then prices rebound and skyrocket. And then you have to, again, inject in another subsidy. And so that's where the problem comes in. Every time people cry, oh, we need help, government help. Government comes in, gives you a little bit of a spoon feed you. When that finishes, you want another subsidy on top of that. And you have this cascading cost over time that government now begins to heavily borrow to feed you.
Thank you, Aka. It becomes catch-22. Dr. Babs, you had a point to make.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, when I was talking about help, I'm not talking about a blanket help to every poor person within the country. I'm talking about the people who are actually economically viable, the people who are in the markets, they are making money. So this is the crisis is a catch-22 actually. If the person that's actually trying to make an effort to do a business is unable to do that business, then you're again losing out money that you were meant to get as a government. So if you slightly reduce what they're supposed to pay so that they can then afford to buy the goods that they're selling in the markets, once they sell them, they're going to get an income that the government, again, is going to benefit from. What is wrong when there's a fuel crisis, it also provokes a political crisis almost all the time, like you've heard in Uzbekistan and Zimbabwe some years ago, because the poor people become depressed, whilst the people at the top are understanding what they're doing in regards to pumping up money into the development. Because from fuel being done in Angola, those are like really long-term things that will take probably another 5 or 4 years before they trickle down to the lowest person. But in the immediate, like as in the now, between now and tomorrow and in the few days, what concessions can they give? By concession, I don't mean like free things to grab from another middle-class person to give to somebody. Just slightly making life a little bit able for the people that are doing business, because they are doing business, they are making an effort to sell what they're selling, but it's becoming harder for them, or maybe to make it slightly cheaper to pay back their loans, just slightly, even a 1% or 2% goes a long way, without not just completely removing it. Because if you don't do these things in volatile, poor countries like ours, it provokes a political mayhem everywhere, because people start wondering, because our governments, the whole of Africa, are not good at explaining economics. We all explain it based on assuming the person you're explaining to has a basic education of up to probably failed in second year in university, when in the actual fact, the majority never even managed to get to university. So we have to make it in a way that a government should be able to explain to me, if I didn't have an education and I'm struggling, that, you know what, in the next 5 years, things will be much better. You're sacrificing because your kids will have it a little bit better than you are. That you go through an explanation. You can even give them examples about how people fought the depression when it was there years ago. But then at the same time, you have to explain to me that you're not going to die because we'll do A, B, C, D for you. In the meantime, this, what we're going to do is not going to be a long run. We can do it for you maybe just for the first 5 months or 1 year. We assess you. If your business is not doing well, then we're wasting money. Stop the business and won't give you any help. So, things like that.
And just to help in that regard, I think just a little bit earlier we did say there are two things you can do in an economy. You can incentivize or you can subsidize. Those are the two forms of help that you can offer anybody. Now, subsidies often create cost structures that create problems in the long run, especially if they, and also the problem is the subsidies are just breeding grounds for corruption. Maybe that's just historically as a country, it's breeding ground. Whenever you're trying to issue help, it's about who gets it and who's at the front of the line, because there's going to be a long line. What I did try and say, maybe to try and add to that point, is how do you get the people with money to spend money on the people without money? Okay. How do you get simple programs like this? How do you get the government, for example, each government office to ensure that they buy from the people at the markets? How do you make sure that you do things like that so that there's revenue flowing through the markets as well? There are countries that have got programs like that, where they actually enforce their government to buy from specific groups of people to ensure that there's business activity and productivity, to avoid the thing of any cash support that might inflate the economy. So I gave a simple example of saying any business that's above 20%, that's above 10 million kwacha in revenue, can be given a discount if they can show that they're on taxes, if they can show that 50% of their procurement programs are in some way, shape, or form supporting the poor, small businesses, local businesses, youth businesses, women businesses, those people. Because if you have big businesses who now say, okay, we've been told that we have to do business with the small business locals, and therefore our money is channeling towards them, then you're creating that stimulus, because that's what you need right now. You need to inject stimulus into these dying sectors of the economy so that there's money flowing through them and it can offset the cost of things rising. So get the big businesses to make sure that they spend money. And what incentive are we offering them to make sure? And it's targeted incentive to tell them that your spending has to go to a marketplace. It has to go to the small business. It has to go to so-and-so's little small bakery around the corner. If you can bring those and bring them in your tax receipt, then we can give you a tax offset as well. Because that means that they're channeling their money, instead of helping some foreign supplier or some rich business, they're now pushing their money to the small local business. So if you can get people who spend money, who have money, to spend money on the people who don't have money, but have things and gifts and things they can do, that's how you can try and reinvigorate some of these things to offset that in the interim.
I think that is a brilliant idea, and I would personally love to hear that that has been implemented. And another point that you raised, Ms. Omtwale, was about the late President Mwanawasa. He's now revered and thought of very fondly, but when he was actually in government, he wasn't the most popular president, was he? Now, it's only now that we see what programs he had put in place, the effects. That's when we can appreciate that. So let's just give this president time to work, and uh, it's time for us to tighten our seatbelts and just get back to work. I think everyone is going to have to roll up their sleeves, as Aka mentioned about ensuring that the rural areas are incentivized to have factories built, or new industries created. I think that would be amazing. Now we have Ruth Mwene, who says we need our members of parliament to go and educate people in their constituencies, because it's not everyone who listens to TVBAKWETU. And someone actually, I think the comments are going very quickly. Faye talked about this being on prime time because these are important matters that we're dealing with, and not everyone has got access to TVBAKWETU. Somebody else said this should be on ZNBC. I'm not sure about that. So that is really important. The points that you raised, that people will just have to kind of start ensuring that they diversify, ensure that their incomes are raised through starting Tuntembas, start selling tomatoes, order it, some people make
Also, just
chanda.
and I don't know if we can just add this point in.
Mhm.
Start doing business locally.
Yeah.
We don't understand the importance of spending. We as Zambians, we've gotten used to this idea of spending on international products too much.
Yeah.
And I know we've had this conversation about even onions. We've gotten to the point where we can't even grow and purchase our own onions as a country, because we haven't developed onion production. Yet we have some of the most fertile soil. You have to take a communitarian approach to economics. This is what people like Malcolm X, this is what even people like the Chinese have done. They've taken a very strong communitarian approach where money circulates in their economy. So if we can just work on sorry about that, if we can just work on circulation of money in the economy, going towards my business to your business, and not so much import leakages. Because one of the problems we refuse to address is the level of import we do as Zambians. It's excessive. I did a statistical survey and found that we're effectively importing 2/3 of what's sitting in households is imported. Okay, so that's jobs, that's income going to other countries. Okay, but if we're getting more trade and we're doing import substitution and we're making sure that we're circulating money between our farm communities and everything, that's the relief we're talking about. So in as much as we say the government, nobody ever wants to go back to the people and say, can we please go through a period where we purchase from ourselves, where we eat our stuff, where we produce our things? And if we can do that, there's money that's going to circulate amongst people. But getting people from that luxury, especially the middle class, just weaning them off that luxury of imported products, South
Good
African
luck with
products, all
that.
these ones, that's where the problem is coming from. So there's had to be some force to say, you know what? It's time to actually make people buy things from this country that we grow. There's no way we can be producing tomato, we can be importing onions. That's as an example, but we have to make sure certain institutions have to be incentivized to make sure that they purchase from the Zambian producers and stimulate Zambians to produce certain things and buy them. Okay, so that you and me and everyone who's buying here, we are buying from each other, because that's how wealth is built. That's how China built wealth. Let's be honest, that's how America built wealth with isolation. That's how so many nations around the world have built wealth and circumvented poverty, by making sure production circulates amongst Zambians. But in Zambia, what we've done is a select few people can afford imports, and they will have the upper class conversation, while everybody else is stuck in the compound, stuck in the shanties, and stuck in the rules, unable to afford anything, because the food I'm eating is not coming from the work of my fellow Zambians. If the food I eat comes from your hands, then my expense is your income. But the food I'm eating is coming from Italian hands, it's coming from Chinese hands, it's coming from somewhere else. It's their income. And that's why this is such an unequally distributed situation that we have to fix as a country. And it's going to take communitarian economics to do that.
The other thing that
economics, I like that, Aka.
The other thing that I'm going to emphasize again, the ideas and all these things that are being said, again, Zambians, you got to listen very carefully. These things, the business to business trade, buying from each other, getting government to, even investors to invest in those small businesses, getting big businesses to buy from small businesses cannot happen until you formalize your business. I want to go back to this. We have in our Zambian economy, we have a huge base of small entrepreneurs that are not formalized. The other day, somebody, like I was telling you, several people were like, oh, we want to get some CDF. I'm just going to give you an example. We want to get CDF. Some of the problems you're hearing from the constituencies, because some of the small businesses are not formalized enough to be able to be even given loans and given businesses. So it's important that when you decide to become an entrepreneur, formalize your enterprise. Formalize your enterprise so that bigger businesses, Zamtel, Zesco, can actually buy supplies, can do business with you. Okay, pay taxes, and ensure that you have bankable business enterprises. It's very, very important. Today, I don't know if you heard, Linda, but the USA has given Zambia $800 million for SMEs empowerment. Okay, so look at the strategic money. USA is actually moving away from just giving grants, and even the European Union, they're not giving grants for you to go and spend on cash transfers. Most of them are actually giving money to promote SME. And if you listen to Samantha Powers, what she said was that this is being targeted toward agribusiness. This is being targeted towards food production because the West realized there's a shortage of food across the globe as a result of supply chains because of the war in East Europe. And so they are looking for alternative production centers, global production centers. And Zambia is sitting at that center. Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, they are sitting in the area where, in terms of agricultural potential, is high. And so they're investing this money and they're saying, look, we want you to put this money in SMEs that are in agro-business and make sure that you can produce food to export to other countries.
Thank you so much. I have just realized we have been speaking for the past 1 hour, 51 minutes and 20 seconds. That is way too long, way beyond what we had actually planned. And Mr. Mtwala wants to say something. Go for it.
No, I was just adding to one simple example of when you're talking about people formalizing their businesses. Just bear in mind what needs to be fixed is the red tape. I'll give you a very simple example. In the last 5 years, mobile money has grown from 15% of the population to 60% of the population, while banking has shrunk from 22% of the population to 20% of the population. What's the difference? Setting up a mobile money account or a mobile money account is done in seconds. Setting up a bank account requires proof of residence, letters, all these things, red tape. So if you can get rid of the red tape in registration of businesses, reduce the costs, and implement the tax the tax incentive for people, or not tax incentive, let me say the tax holiday that we said, or the graduated tax for small businesses to get them started, more people would be willing to actually register and formalize their businesses and therefore be accessible to things like that. It starts by getting rid of the red tape, making it easier for people to start actually operating on a more formal way, so that we can have such stimulus incentives. And just to add, one final thing is, when we're looking at crunching times in society, those who cannot help themselves, the orphans, the widows, the elderly, they do need social help. They do. Nobody can ever get away from that. But we also have to remember that families should also come together to also help those who they can. Now, those who are able-bodied need stimulus. it's the unable-bodied and the unable. They can get subsidized. That's what I think we should always do as a society. Stimulate the able-bodied and then just add some subsidies to those who are not able to take care of themselves.
Absolutely. Well, viewers, if you have just joined us, I'm terribly sorry. We're coming to the end of the program. We have been discussing fuel hikes. We have been talking about inflation, deflation, and Mr. Mutwale has been giving us some incredible analogies on how simply you can actually grasp these concepts. Thank you so much for having joined us. I've been your host, Linda Banks, with Dr. Barbara and Mr. Mutwale, who we'll be seeing an awful lot of because he's mindful of amazing insights when it comes to economics and various other business aspects. Thank you so much for joining us. It's good night from me. God bless you and God bless our country.
Thank you very much.